Hey there, this is Natalie, and while the winter 2021 season hasn't really properly started yet, I did manage to get a look at the first double episode of White Fox's highly anticipated new Isekai series, Mushoku Tensei, also known as Jobless Reincarnation, I Will Seriously Try If I Go to Another World. It was a leak, and this show will officially start airing next week. So I'm not including any screenshots or clips. Everything I'll be showing in the video behind me is from the official trailer. But in this video, I'm going to be giving my first impressions of the anime without deep spoilers, other than what the basic premise and setup is. You know, synopsis level stuff. And I'll also be talking about just why this light novel adaptation has been so hyped, and why many people, including me, are expecting that it could well become the next big Isekai show. So, the premise of Mushoku Tensei does sound, in 2021 at least, like a very generic Isekai. The main character is a neat shut-in who gets hit by Truck-kun while trying to save some teenagers, and is reincarnated into a fantasy world with all of his memories, and it quickly transpires that he's very gifted at magic. Still, while this does sound completely by the numbers, this series began as a web novel in 2012, long before the big Isekai boom. This means that in some ways it was one of the progenitors of some of the ideas we see a lot in the more generic Isekai shows. But it also means that it has all kinds of stuff in it that doesn't go at all like you would expect, based on what are now the conventions of the Isekai genre. It will feel completely innovative and refreshing to a lot of people jaded by samey Isekai series, because it predates the cliches, and so it's neither trying to adhere to or subvert them. Now, the main thing you will notice right from the start to be very different from the majority of later Isekai shows is the main character. Sure, it doesn't sound that unusual for the protagonist of a modern Isekai to be a shut-in. That's also the case with Subaru in Re:Zero, or with Shiro and Sora in No Game No Life. But this guy, well, he's 34 years old, and not really designed to be relatable to the audience at all. Adult protagonists rather than teens are fairly common in Isekai too. There are plenty of series with salaryman type main characters, like That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, or The Saga of Tanya the Evil, or shows like Log Horizon that have an ensemble cast of adult main characters. Then you get the Isekai shows where the adult protagonist's job is important to what they end up doing in the new world. These would include Ascendance of a Bookworm, Death March to the New World Rhapsody, or that one with the furry wrestler. The characters themselves are always different, but the base situation of the protagonist and how it ties into their Isekai story as a starting point tends to usually be quite tropey. While the salaryman archetype is often shown to be bored and unfulfilled with their lives before being isekai'd, they're generally designed to be relatable and likeable, so we're happy to see them getting to have adventures in a more exciting world. The protagonists who have professional skills or interests that end up being relevant to the story may be less broadly relatable, but they usually have something interesting about their pre-isekai selves that feeds into the show, often lending itself to the more high-concept types of isekai stories where the protagonist has an unusual thing they want to do in the fantasy world, like creating books or opening a pet shop or introducing Japanese food to the people of the setting. With Mushoku Tensei, well, the protagonist's past life does very much affect what he does and how he views life in the new world, just like in stories where the main character's previous profession or passion impacts their motivations, but it's more because he regrets everything he was. He has no skills or passions, no useful life experience, and the only useful thing he really brings with him from his past is the determination not to be like that anymore. He is pretty self-aware about the fact that he's wasted his life so far, but as someone who's had this unhealthy lifestyle of hiding in a room by himself, jerking off and watching TV all day for 20 years or so, it's not like the way to start again and improve things is easy to find. After beginning to hide away because of intensive bullying in his teens, over time his situation spiraled into one where he found himself unable to break out of it. This is a real social problem that happens to people, particularly young men, and not just in Japan. And so seeing what the situation of somebody in a late stage of this feels like, how hopeless his situation is even though he wants to change it, is pretty dark and real for a truck-kun isekai show. He's basically the very thing a character like Subaru, who became a hikikomori and stopped interacting with the world just a few months before the start of ReZero, fears himself becoming. When Subaru talks about how he was wasting his days in sloth and achieving nothing, even though he knows, just as his father told him, that in his case it could have just been a phase where he needed to take some time out for himself, it could also have been the path to ending up like this guy. Incidentally, I keep calling the protagonist of Mushoku Tensei in his pre-isekai life this guy because we never find out what his name was. That's not especially rare in reincarnation-style isekai stories, generally just to avoid the protagonist having a different name in the first few scenes to the one we need to get used to for them. But in this case, it kind of feels like, well, yeah, this guy's life was so meaningless and left so little mark on the world that his name wouldn't be important, and it really is only the name he was given in the new world that's worth remembering. At the moment when he's killed, he's basically in a rock-bottom situation due to having been evicted when his parents died, and all he can do is regret everything. It's very hard to know what would have become of him. This hopelessness is what drives him to try to save the teenagers from the truck, wanting to do something meaningful, and which also sets up just what a blessing this chance to start a new life again from scratch is for this character, and really sells the concept that this is someone who's wasted one life trying to make the second chance they've been given count. It's a lot more weighty than what we usually get for a character prior to them being isekai'd. It's not all as grim and humorless as I might be making it sound there though. Reborn as Rudeus, the treasured son of Paul and Zenith Greyrat, the protagonist does have a dry sense of humour about things, as well as some other things that make for comedy potential. He is as thirsty as you'd expect someone who died a virgin at 34 to be, and while this is played for comedy, especially while everyone around him is just seeing him as an innocent child, there's a kind of realism to the lewder jokes that makes them feel less basic and overdone than in a lot of shows that go for similar protagonist is having pervy thoughts gags. Rudeus, in the beginning of the story, is neither framed as a trashy kind of guy that we want to root for anyway because it's funny, like Kazuma Sato, nor a paragon who's only concerned with his mission to work hard and be a good person. He literally is the massively faulty guy he was before, trying to do his best, but at the same time riddled with less than heroic thoughts and traits. This is good writing. Just like Subaru at the start of ReZero, there's enough there to make you care about him, but enough of his own defects holding him back to make him feel like he has a long way to go, and like he's going to have a character arc that isn't just about acquiring powers and defeating external problems. But that doesn't mean he doesn't get any immediate growth. We do see him overcome his fear of leaving home and being out among other people very early in the story, though this is not framed as something that's easy for him, because naturally this is going to be the first obstacle he'll have to overcome to be able to make the best of his new life. It's interesting how this is handled compared with other shut-in type protagonists, where the very act of going outside of the home he's been safely living in is shown to be this intensely frightening thing. Because he was reincarnated as a baby, and is only 5 years old when this scene occurs. His parents and his magic tutor who've been raising him don't think there's anything peculiar about this small child being terrified of getting on a horse and going through the village for the first time. But we know this is really a grown man facing up to a fear that's held him back for much of a whole lifetime in our world. As he begins to realise that people aren't staring at him, that there's nothing to be afraid of, it's another reminder of how important this second chance is for him to be able to get this confidence and freedom as a child this time. With Subaru, he didn't really start out with a safe space in the ReZero world, where he was summoned as his current self into the middle of the capital, rather than reincarnated as a baby. And he has more of a slow burn change as he begins to form relationships with people he wants to take action to save, and get over what we later find out was the cause of his reclusive state, which was an inferiority complex. So a big moment of facing his fears from the old world isn't really appropriate for his character arc. By the time he faces his past in Arc 4, he's already had the growth he needed to overcome it. He, however, does confront the laziness aspect of his former lifestyle in Arc 2 of ReZero, when he tries in one loop just asking Roswell if he can live in the mansion as a guest, rather than becoming a butler and having to work. When he doesn't work, he doesn't get to form relationships with the other people at the mansion in the same way, or go out and make friends in the village, and he basically realises he needs to swap his sloth for diligence, the 7 deadly sins and their counterpart virtues being a major theme in ReZero. In Mushoku Tensei, the slothful side of the protagonist's past shut-in lifestyle doesn't need to be addressed in this way, because when he's reborn as Rudeus Greyrat, he's already ready to vow to work hard in this life. It's literally in the title of the series. With our other most well-known shut-in Isekai heroes, Shiro and Sora from No Game No Life, neither the laziness or the fear of the world outside really needs to be confronted, because they get summoned to a very specific type of fantasy world that really suits them. So naturally, they want to be interacting with it far more than their original world, making it feel more like their reclusive lifestyle was just down to the real world having little of interest to offer them, and the world of games being a much better fit. In Mushoku Tensei, it isn't the fact that he's in a cool and exciting fantasy world and can learn to use magic and become someone special that makes the protagonist, now Rudeus, want to come out of his shell and make the most of his new life. He's decided this before he even realises what kind of setting he's been reborn into. It's the loathing he has for how he spent his first chance. The awesome potential for adventure in the fantasy world isn't the big opportunity he has to address his regrets and become a more fulfilled person. It's being reincarnated at all. For all the advantages that being born with his adult intellect and memories give him, it also means that, as Rudeus, he has to recover from his old life, as well as building a new one. The protagonist isn't the only thing that makes Mushoku Tensei quite different from the tropey isekai shows it sounds like on the surface, though it's certainly the one you'll notice the most in the early episodes. Another thing that feels quite different from most reincarnation isekai stories from recent years is how big of a role Rudeus's parents, Paul and Zenith, have in the story, and how developed they are as characters. There's a lot of family drama in the series, surprisingly, and that relies on these characters feeling like well-established people, rather than minor characters whose lives revolve around the protagonist, and who are barely seen or mentioned once he's off doing exciting things with his new friends, like in many series. The setting does have demon lords and fantasy races and all the high fantasy stuff you want to see in an isekai, but it stays true to the sense that this is a story of someone trying to live a richer life, with all that would include, like his relationships with family and friends, romance, education, working, and so on. There's plenty of magic and adventure, but the heroic stuff is just one facet of Rudeus trying to live a full and valuable life. So, that's a lot of the reasons why I think this show will grab people, and why I think it could be the next big thing in Isekai. It won't be for everyone. I think that, like with ReZero or Shield Hero, the kind of fans who like their protagonists on the more Jesus-kun side may not find it easy to get on board with it at the start. But I think it's probably going to find a lot of new fans who are going to want to get really invested in it now it has an anime adaptation. For those who were already fans of the light novels and who've been waiting for way too long to get this anime, I also think from what I've seen that it will be a high quality production. I mean, it looked good to me, and I watched it after spending all day working on a video talking about White Fox's production problems on ReZero Season 2, so I was probably paying attention to how it looked more than I normally do with an anime. I won't get into things novel readers will be interested in when they see the episodes, like whether there's cut content and so on, because again, I watched a leak like a bad person, and so I'm assuming all of you watching this haven't seen it yet and won't want to know that sort of detail. But production-wise, I think existing fans of Mushoku Tensei are going to be satisfied. So that's about all from me about first impressions and what you need to know about Mushoku Tensei. Let me know if you're a fan of the light novels already and are excited for the season, or if you're going to be picking this show up as an anime only. I definitely recommend it so far. As always, please consider subscribing if you enjoyed this video and you want to see more of my anime coverage through the winter 2021 season. I'm predominantly a ReZero and Attack on Titan channel, and I do a lot of theory and analysis type videos about those series, as well as covering both the anime adaptations and source material. But for the coming season, I'm also going to be doing some weekly episode reviews of a couple of other shows, and videos like this one focusing on other interesting anime. So hopefully I'll have something to interest you among all that. Subscribing, liking the video, and talking to me in the comments all really helps me out. So consider it if you enjoy this kind of anime content. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you again very soon.